You're listening to the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse at bellydancegeek.com.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nadira Jamal, and welcome to episode 23 of the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse. This episode is being sponsored for the first time by a company called Leotoes, which makes padded dance footies. You can check them out at leotoes.com, spelled Leotoes.com. Now, the Clubhouse is a place where dancers can get together and geek out on all of those things that are hard to get in classes and in DVDs. It's really easy to get help with the what. So if you want to learn some moves or some choreographies, there are a lot of resources out there for you. But if you want to really dig into the why and the how, so things like culture and musicality, composition, professionalism, that can be a little bit harder to find. So every month I interview a different guest expert on a nice geeky topic, and we always have time for question and answer so you can geek out too. So if you think that knowledge and creativity go together like chocolate and peanut butter, you are in the right place. So my guest today is Sahra Kent, also known as Sahra Saeeda. Sahra moved to Cairo to research her master's thesis in 1989 and received a contract with the Meridian Heliopolis 5-star hotel where she danced for 6 years. She's taken her love of dance ethnology and created the Journey Through Egypt program to help inspire and educate more dancers to the culture and history of belly dance. You can check her out at journeythroughegypt.com. And Sahra is going to talk about the puzzle of Egyptian folklore. I'm so excited about this topic. So thank you so much for coming, Sahra.
It's so much my pleasure. Thank you so much for doing something like this.
My pleasure, too. So tell us how you got started in Oriental dance.
Actually, I've had twin interests of dance and anthropology for quite some time since I was little, and also a love of Egypt. And I was a modern dancer. I didn't get into the Martha Graham or Alvin Ailey that I wanted to, so I decided to go with cultural anthropology. Later on, and archaeology, and later on, I was sitting in a dirt pit, not finding anything in anthropology and archaeology, and so I started taking belly dance classes just for fun. And my teacher was asking me to do shows and things, and somehow not finding anything and being in a dirt pit against wearing shiny clothes and getting to dance again, you know, the shiny clothes and the dancing won out, so I kept with that. And at that point in time, it was the late 70s, and really we didn't know much about, anyway, we didn't out here, much about where this dance was from and its history and its anthropology. And since that was already a couple of my degrees in school, I just started applying that to that. So Oriental dance and then eventually Egyptian folklore became my research subjects, and luckily there were the black and white videos that I could get started with. So that's how I got into it, and I danced in Los Angeles area with a live orchestra for 13 years. Those were the good old days. And then went to Egypt and had my own show out there with an orchestra and folklore dancers for 6 years. And then I've come back and put everything together and tried to start making sense of all that I had learned about the folklore of Egypt. So that brings us up to the present.
And can you tell us a little bit more about your background in dance research and what kind of experiences you had researching the dance?
Yes, my master's is in dance ethnology from UCLA, so that's taking my dance degrees and also anthropology degrees and integrating them. And it was fascinating to understand the why and the social context that these dances flourish in. And luckily, while I was at UCLA, there were many very interesting women there. And also, Farida Fahmy happened to be going there. We started on the same day. So the two of us always were put together for anything having to do with Egypt. And she was, of course, from the Reda Company, from Mahmoud Reda. And I had already danced with members of the Komea, and these are the two national dance companies of Egypt. And I noticed that although both of them were fascinating, the same dance, like this is a Hagala. Well, the two of them did it differently. This is Saidi. Well, the two of them did it differently. And so finally I had the courage to ask Farida, okay, but who's right? And she said, well, of course this is not how the real people dance. These are staged. And so that was shocking. And I went to my dance ethnology teacher and said that I felt, to be totally honest, rather betrayed that I had spent like 7 years, really studying this and to feel like that it was nothing. And she said that every country, every culture, every population has a right to represent themselves on a dramatic theater stage and to give themselves that respect. And that was a turning point. And then she said, but if you personally care how the real people dance, home-style people dance, then that's your subject for research. So that started my subject for research, and went to Egypt, and I'm still studying. Every year I go there and learn more.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of us have heard the term dance ethnology, but I don't think a lot of us really know what's involved. Can you tell us what that discipline is about?
It's basically cultural anthropology as applied to dance. So specifically, say that there's a dance form, like we know Saidi dance. We'll just throw that out there. There's a lot of different contexts to Saidi dance. Saidi are a people, and they have their own style of both private home style dance and public home style dance, which is dancing with the Asaya. And also different people have been inspired by that and brought that to the stage, including Mahmoud Reda and the Komeya and other people. And and it fulfills a place in their life. So the cultural anthropology of Saidi dance would be for the Saidi people. I continue it in my journey through Egypt outside of the Said as well, because, okay, here's some people that do this dance, and it's fascinating, and I love to go to the Said and dance with them as well, but it's also interesting to see what Mahmoud Reda did with it, and see what the Komeya did with it, and then see what almost every single belly dancer of Cairo did with it, because sooner or later most of them had a Saidi tableau in their show, and then see what we do with it across the ocean. For some reason, it's fascinating to us too. So the cultural anthropology would basically be the way that this dance fits into its own culture. Dance ethnology, the way I see it, it's not only that, but it continues. How does this dance style fit in our culture? Because I was doing Saidi dance before I knew the Saidi people were even in Egypt. So it's fascinating how some of these dances have worldwide appeal. And then when we start really looking at the populations that do them, to me, it just makes it richer and more interesting. But then I'm a geek. So
I think pretty much everybody listening to this is, so you are in good company, or maybe we are.
Perfect.
So, what are some of the challenges for outsiders in making sense out of Egyptian folkloric dance?
I think the biggest problem is, or the biggest challenge, is that most of us, it's not really our culture. And it's an indigenous dance to a specific culture. And when we're not part of that culture, then it's harder for us to understand how the movements are rooted in the culture. But what's interesting is the culture itself doesn't give it as much respect as we do. So there's good things from being an outsider, and there's good things from being an insider. To me, what's really exciting is to be an outsider who has access to go into the culture and dance and feel this electricity and also appreciate it from the outside as well. To be honest, once you've gone into Egypt and you've danced with Saidi people, you never do a Saidi dance the same again, and the same with Nubian, and the same with everything else. It gives you a different depth. So that's probably the hardest thing, but it can be remedied. You just, it's like if you love Jordanian dance and you go to a Jordanian wedding, it can be, in any of the big cities in the United States, and do the dubki with them all night and sit with the ladies and talk and cook mensif with them and things like that. And suddenly the dubki isn't just steps anymore. It's much deeper than that. So the problem that we have with it can be remedied.
Mm-hmm.
That makes any sense?
Absolutely.
So, okay, good.
Now, I haven't dug as deeply into Egyptian folklore because I tend to lean more in the Turkish direction. But one of the things I realized, as I was trying to kind of make sense just of the Oriental dance landscape, much less the folkloric landscape, is, one of the things that was interesting and confusing for me is that, Egypt is a really diverse place. One region and what they're doing is totally different from the other.
That's what's so interesting is that when you say, an Egyptian does this, there's so much diversity. Like the huge area that's Saidi, they have a different history and a different culture than the Nubians that were relocated after the building of the High Dam. Cairo has its own culture, and a lot of people from Cairo, they may think they know, about Saidi or Nubian, and maybe they've never even been there. Then you go up into the Delta. This area, it's green, it's beautiful, and it's very accessible to other Mediterranean countries. And so there's a lot of people who come into Egypt for various reasons and stay there and make their own little village. So even when you go into the Delta, a lot of people say, it's just Fellahin dance. Well, it has this kind of generic Fellahin dance, especially on stage, but these different little urban communities, they all have their different movement styles as well. And it's fascinating because it's vastly under-researched, and so there's always something new to learn. So anybody who wants to go into any city in the Delta and start doing research, I would highly recommend it. But I think also Egypt was ruled by somebody else, not themselves, for 2,000 years. And a lot of what people did was divide and conquer. And they really were kind of separated into different regions. And in 1952, finally, Egypt was being truly ruled by an Egyptian. And that's when everything turned around. And by the 60s, the national dance companies were formed in order to, at least for dance and music, learn their own dances and share them back and forth between regions. Because really, I think sometimes we know more about the dance of a region than somebody from a different region in Egypt.
A really interesting point. And, around that same time, or in like the 30, 40, 50 years before that, isn't that also when you start getting national folk dance troupes for the first time in other parts of the world, where everybody's kind of saying, let's present our dance on a stage in a more formal way?
Yeah, it was a worldwide thing that was going on. Also, like Mahmoud Reda, he was introduced to it because he traveled around with an Argentinian folklore company for a while. And then the Soviet Union was in Egypt building the High Dam. When Mahmoud was starting the Reda troupe, they didn't want to be nationalized. They wanted to be private. So Egypt used the people who had started so many dance companies, the Soviets, to form, to go out, do research, bring it back, put it on stage, design a training routine, or, just design a dance company. So, and they had designed so many as well. So some of the choreographies of the Kolmeya, you can kind of see similar kind of things in other countries with different outfits on. So yeah, it was a worldwide phenomenon for a while.
And it seemed like that is definitely, has a big nationalistic component, especially as, a lot of companies start getting independent for the first time in a long time. And I think it's a really interesting thing, too, because it's not just about what do people do, but it's how do we want to present what we do, which kind of ties back into what your professor was saying, which is so fascinating. Anyway, that was a little geeky side note. Now, when we're looking at Egyptian folklore, one of the interesting things is, you can spend days on YouTube just looking at clips. And, as you were saying when you were looking at the different folkloric, you look at two different clips of the same dance and say, I can't tell if these are the same thing or not. And one of the things that I really picked up on when I, was reading things on your blog and in your newsletter, which for the record, everybody is awesome, is that in a lot of ways the context has more to do with what we're seeing than other aspects of the dance. So can you tell us how the context can play out?
The context, like home
what are the
style
technical elements that can affect what we're seeing?
Okay. I put it in a really kind of simplistic form because I was getting all these puzzle pieces of information. So then I found about the regions. So of course, a puzzle piece of information from one region is not going to match up with a puzzle piece from a different region. And then even though I may have puzzle pieces from the same region, I realized that they're not all from the same context or the same population. So I kind of made, very simplistically, 6 different card tables with 6 different jigsaw puzzles on them. And one of them is home style. So this is how just normal people, they're not professional dancers, they may love to dance, but in Egypt it's very specific. Are you professional or are you not professional? And it doesn't have anything to do with ability. It only has to do with, are you being paid? So that's a big context in their country. But so the first one is home style dancers and how they dance. The next jigsaw puzzle is local professionals, and often they dance differently than the home style people. Like in the Said, the home style people, there's a inside dance, and then there's also the outside dance, and mostly what we know about is the outside dance with the stick. And then, but then the local professionals who actually gets paid to entertain them is like the Banat Maz and Gawazi. So these are separate tribes of people that are paid to be the entertainers, and their dance is different. So then the third table would be the regional dance companies, which were, again, born in those times of the 60s, and the worldwide folklore companies, where they thought maybe we could make people understand each other if we share our music and dance. So each one of those, by law, there's a regional dance company for each government. And some places the government is the region, and other places like the Said, the Said is so big that it has several governments. But anyway, so they have, that depends on the director and all sorts of factors on that one. But they're mostly people from the area, so they're still living and performing for people who live there. Now we're going to jump into the next 3 tables, which are basically Cairo-based. And these are usually the ones until YouTube, which I swear is God's gift to dance ethnologists. But anyway, before YouTube, these were mostly the 3 contexts that we had available to us. So the first one I usually talk about is Mahmoud Reda and the Reda Company. So that's the Reda and the Fahmi families coming together. They loved Egypt. They really wanted to make sure that Egyptian people were honoring themselves, and they wouldn't put anything up on stage that did not honor the people that they were representing. So he was very careful with that. But they didn't exactly do the same steps. So for us, our culture says a folklore company should do the same steps as the home style people. But theirs was, no, it has to be changed enough so it's worthy enough for the stage. So that's 2 different cultural biases. So Mahmoud says, keeps telling me, no, this was for the stage. This was to make it beautiful. This is for them to be happy with themselves. It never was meant as a photocopy of evening's entertainment. So that was the Reda troupe, and Reda loved the black and white films. He loved ballroom dance. He loved Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. So that was kind of his fusion. Then the next, because he refused to become national, he wanted to stay private. The Egyptian government brought in Russian experts to form the Kolmeya. So now the Kolmeya is being formed. They also did their research, but now it's also being filtered through Soviet Union people who have put together a lot of different dance companies. It's going through their eyes. So now this is another little bit of a filter on it. And for them to do what they felt was correct for the stage. They liked ballet, so whereas Mahmoud Reda, maybe he'll put some ballroom steps in there and a little Fred Astaire slide at the end of something, then the Kolmeya would put something like a ballet entrance. And then the last table that I talk about is the one, and I'm not saying these in like any kind of evolutionary order, it's just steps removed from the original. But the last one was what we used to have available to us back in the 70s and 80s, were the big belly dance stars with folklore dancers around her. And that basically is what Cairo knows about that region and how Cairo is entertained by that region. So maybe the men around her are doing Saidi dance, but maybe it has nothing really to do with Saidi dance, or maybe they're doing Suez Canal style dance. It's all for the entertainment of Cairo people. So it's only including the steps and the costume and this kind of thing that a Cairo person would be interested in. So it has a lot to do with where you're viewing it and for what purpose.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I was reading about this tables idea on your blog, which is so exciting, what I really connected with is that each table has a complete. What makes each table different is what the context is. So, who's doing the dancing? Who are they dancing for? And is this in a social or performance context and other things? Which I think is really an awful lot of what makes us so helpful in understanding what we're seeing. Can you tell us about that? Who, what, and why for each of the tables?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important because, like a home style person, they're doing it for their own personal happiness. They're in a social situation. Often the women are just dancing with women, and men are just dancing with men, and they're just enjoying themselves. So that is its own group, and then the second group, the local professionals. This is entirely for paid entertainment. So, but they're also dancing. It's like, okay, the first one is we are dancing with us. The second one, the local professionals, are we are dancing for us, because they're still dancing for the people that they live in the same city. And then the third one, which is the regional company, we are dancing for us, but now we have a little bit of influence from Cairo because they decide who the director is and they decide bureaucracy. So maybe it will have, it depends. Different places will have different amounts of influence. And then the Reda troupe, this one's really deep, but it's we are dancing about them because we're Cairo people dancing for Cairo people. The director is a Cairo person, but we're still dancing about other regions. So now we start having a fusion because it's a stage. It's and before the Reda troupe, folklore was not allowed on stage because the Reda troupe, like 1952, which is the independence year. I found a pamphlet from the Chamber of Commerce of Egypt that was printed in 1952. I found it at the UCLA library. And, of course, it had a chapter on dance, so I went to that. And the chapter in dance said that they're very pleased that they have ballet companies from all over the world that come to the opera. And they also have rhythmic dancing in the schools, whatever that was in 1952. But dance in its indigenous form is a national embarrassment. So that's how they stood on their own folklore in 1952. And Mahmoud Reda and the Fahmy families, both of the families, decided that there had to be a new category of dance because Farida's father was very, very pro-Egyptian. Her mother was British, so her mother had no problem with her daughter dancing. And the Reda family was extremely diverse. Some of them were very well educated. Their father was the head of the library in Cairo. But then they also had real, like a lot of Beledi people in their family too, that they had respect for education and they had respect for the culture, the real indigenous culture, not just the bicultural, high-class Turkish stuff that was going on at the time. Because Turkey ruled Egypt for a long time. So the high class in Egypt spoke Turkish and danced Turkish dances and dressed in a Turkish way to be high class. So there was a lot of diversity going on in Egypt at the same time. So anyway, a lot of context. It's just a big subject. It's hard for me to hold down to one little subject on this. But yeah, context was everything. Context was everything. So it was not only the region, but are you dancing indoors for yourself or outdoors to be paid or on a theater stage or on a nightclub stage? But then even home style. Are you like neighborhood Beledi, Shabi? So you get to dance in the street for weddings, or are you high class and possibly as a woman you don't leave your house ever? So there's a lot of, even in one table, a lot of different diversity. Mm-hmm. One thing I say a lot in Journey Through Egypt, it's complicated. So
if it wasn't complicated, it wouldn't be so interesting.
That's true. I even learned it's complicated in Japanese, but right now I'm not sure I would say it right, so I'm a little bit embarrassed to try it. But we had our 50th Journey Through Egypt 1 in Nagoya a couple weeks ago, Japan, and our 51st in Hiroshima, Japan, 2 weeks ago. And that was really exciting. I was going to be happy if we even got one Journey Through Egypt workshop going, and then to make it to 51 is just amazing, really amazing. So.
That's really impressive, but based on everything I've heard about this workshop, you deserve it.
Oh, well, thank you. It's my favorite subject. What can I do?
I'd like to take a step back a little bit, and you talked about the category of we dance about them, which is a really interesting idea because you've got three tables in there, right? You had the Reda troupe. You had was it the Komea? Is that the right way to say it?
Yes.
And then you also had the Cairo dancers, and all of those three groups are dancing about somebody else for a Cairo audience. But it seems like their intentions and their assumptions and their stereotypes are all different and play out differently in those three styles. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
And how do you see that playing differently?
And that's one thing in cultural anthropology that I've been trying to stay pretty true to, is not putting my idea of categories on it, but going into the culture and figuring out their categories. I already knew from dancing both of the different techniques that Reda and Komea had a different technique movement base. I knew they approached the different regions differently, like that. But how am I going to say this? But even the aesthetics from their own personal histories are different. That makes any sense. And then the Cairo, they're dancing about somebody else because that's what the Cairo audience wants to see. And why do they know about the somebody else? It's usually because of the Reda and the Komea. So not only they are dancing kind of a fusion, stereotypic movement and costume and personality of the other people, they're also usually doing it only through understanding from Kome and Reda.
Mm.
And then we do it here, and usually it's what we do here is maybe we saw something like Nagel Fuad. She was really big on having a huge, beautiful show. She was a great show woman, but she was married to the director of the Komea. So there was a lot of folklore in her shows, and it was Komea based. But a lot of us saw her videos, and so like we know about Saidi dance maybe from a Reda video, or maybe we saw Nagel Fuad's dancers around her, which are Komea, but only the part that nightclub audience would want to see. Mm. So it gets more and more complicated all the time.
And presumably what they want to see is based on how they feel about people from this region. I mean, I know that in a lot of big cities, you know, it's not even just in Egypt, but let's say, you know, I'm in New York and I'm going to dance about people from Alabama. Is that going to be complimentary to them or not, depending on what my audience wants to see and how I feel about it and how much research I bothered to do?
Exactly. And that's hard to generalize, too. I mean, who knows? Most of, you know, people say, you know, in Egypt, what does this region feel about another? Well, basically all the regions think that they're best, so I'll just leave that there. But that's just natural, I guess. But I know early on I told Farida something that I had learned, and she said, what? And I said, yeah. And she said, who told you that? And I said, Egyptian. And it was something about the Saidi dance. And she said, okay, but is he Saidi? Is he like an urban Saidi? Is he rural? Does he have a farm? You know, does he wear a galabea? Does he wear, you know, does he own a lot of land? Is he a Fendi or something? And I'm going, no, I think he's from Cairo. And she says, okay, you just got a Cairo man's viewpoint on Saidi. And I said, but he's still Egyptian. And she says, okay, tell me about Navajo dance. I go, okay, I got it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, really, honestly, thank goodness for Farida Fahmy. She, you know, she's got tough love sometimes, but she really, you know, opened my eyes quickly, and to not just generalizing and say, oh, they do this in Egypt, you know, therefore I should somehow stick it in my dance, which unfortunately a lot of us were doing, including me. So.
Now, I think, you know, to help us understand this table's approach, it might be helpful to walk through an example. So could you tell us about how one genre of folklore plays out in each of the different tables? Saidi would be a great choice, but if you have another dance that you'd like to use as an example, that would be good too.
No, Saidi's good.
I think most dancers recognize Saidi, so it's a good common ground.
Yeah, which is funny because if one of us, usually here or in Europe, knows about one form of folklore of Egypt, it's usually Saidi, all over the place. Which is funny because they're one of the most conservative of their own people dancing in public, so kind of funny. But anyway, so going through the 6 tables for Saidi. Okay, so the first one is home style. So basically they have 2 different categories of home style dance, and one is inside the home and one is outside the home. So if you're inside the home, you'd probably put on a hip scarf. And the Said is a big area, so there's probably different home style dances going on in many, many different homes. People are a little surprised by that, but if you think about it, I mean, right where you're sitting right now, do you know how your neighbors dance? You know, so a lot of families, you know, have different styles of dance even inside their home. Mm-hmm. So the outdoors dance is usually done with a stick, and men and women know how to do both of these dances. They usually consider all over the Middle East inside stuff is female and outside stuff is male. It's just the categories. But inside the house, you're dancing with a hip scarf. The women are doing it for sure. And if the men feel comfortable enough, if there's not a stranger around, then they would probably put on a hip scarf and also dance. That was a really big surprise to me because, for one thing, I was a stranger that was the buzzkill for all their dances until they got to know me. So that was, I felt bad about that when I found out that all those times people were waiting for me to leave so, the men could dance with their families. But then there's the outdoor dance. It's considered more public. It doesn't have a hip scarf. It's mostly what we know as Saidi basic, that, step and that little kick forward or with a heel drop, either way. Different cities do it differently. But anyway, and then dancing with the asaya. And again, maybe a woman knows how to do that. A lot of women know how to do that. But if she's not supposed to dance where any stranger can see her, normally she can't dance outside. And there's not enough room to have a stick like that in this style inside the house. So it would have to be outdoors. So mostly it's men dancing with this outside. But I've seen some girls, because they're still allowed to dance outside while they're still prepubescent girls, they're dancing with a stick and they know how. And it's not women making fun of men. Because if you know any Saidi man, there is no way a woman is going to make fun of them in public using the stick. So that's just a stage thing that's going on, and mostly for foreign people. Okay, so that's home style.
Can I
Then we
actually
get
stop you
to
for a second?
Huh? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so there's one thing that's really relevant to what you just said that I'm not sure if everybody knows about, and that's the idea of the in the house level of privacy. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Most of the Middle Eastern populations, inside the house is private. It's considered female, but the men know it as well. So, because little boys grow up in a female world until they're about 7 or 8 years old, and then suddenly they're man. And they're constantly trying to get into that female world again, and if they're lucky, they have sisters, and they can go in and dance with, members of their family. So anyway, there is the private dancing where many of us will never see, but if you go to Egypt and you're female, then for the most part, there's a few places not, but for the most part, you can go in and dance with the women. You'll also make it so that men can't come in and dance because you're a stranger. But and then you could also go into the public part of the outdoor dance and you could watch that. But because you're there, a woman can't do the outside. So it's part of the cultural anthropology of the privacy and who's allowed to see them dance. So if you're a woman, you can dance with women in private. But if you're a man, you could never see that, which is why it's really great being a female cultural anthropologist.
Because you get access.
Huh?
Yeah, for me that was I'm sorry, I said because you get access.
Yes. Yeah.
But for me, understanding that there's that kind of third layer of privacy made a whole lot of things make more sense because, at least here in the U.S., you have private things that happen in the bedroom or bathroom, and then you have public life. And,
right.
There's some middle ground, but, this idea of there's an intermediate space where you can be with other women and you can be with men that you're closely related to, but other men are not allowed into that space, otherwise it becomes public. All of a sudden, a lot of things make more sense. Like, why is it okay to dance but not be a dancer? You can dance in your private space as long, when you're a professional, you're taking what should be done in a private space and doing it in a public space. So. And
that's another thing. It's like, and we could really get into this one, like wearing of shoes. I didn't wear shoes when I belly danced when I was here in LA until my knees started getting bad, and then I had to start wearing them, and my knees are fine, so that's good. But anyway, when I met Farida, she insisted that I wear shoes, and that was about the time that I was starting to wear shoes anyway, so she was happy that I was And I kept asking why, and she says, because it makes you more respectable. And that was hard to do because everybody I knew and respected were dancing without shoes, you know. But then later on when I was in Egypt, so it's not an aesthetic here so much, but when I was in Egypt, it made more sense because you don't go barefoot outside. You don't even go barefoot inside your house. So you have your outdoor shoes, and when you come in, you take them off and put on your house slippers. And even when I'm at Farida's house, and I was in my bedroom and barefoot, and I, come out for something, and she goes, "Where are your shoes?" So even inside the house, you wear shoes. The only place you don't wear shoes is the bedroom. Mm. So it's giving that kind of intimacy, just simply not wearing shoes when you're Oriental dancing. And she says one of the reasons she's respected Tahay karaoke is she always wore shoes. It gets really complicated, and I know that's really a flashpoint, and I think it's great when people wear shoes, and I think it's great when people don't wear shoes. I'm fine with it either way, but it was a real interesting layer that they don't usually tell us, that this is one layer of intimacy where an Oriental dancer in Egypt would be wearing shoes or not wearing shoes. And another thing, of course, your feet have to be perfectly clean, because if you have dirty feet, then that just really disgusts all sorts of people. So that's one reason that some dancers say they wear shoes, is to keep their feet clean. It gets really complicated. So, but that's also getting into the privacy thing.
All right. So I took you off on a little bit of a tangent. I think you were just about done with talking about the home style table.
Yeah. So then we go into the local professionals. The local professionals for the Said, at least in Luxor, are the Gawazi, especially like the Banat Mazen. There's also another Gawazi group. But Banat Mazen had a specialty in that they had those wonderful knee-length skirts that they flipped around. That was their specialty. Later on, they went to a full-length dress. But you can see it's like this special stomping kind of motion with the hip flip that a lot of Gawazi dancers in in Luxor have. But it's more like you're born into the family. And if you're born into certain families, then if you're a man, you're going to be a musician. And sometimes, even depending on the branch of the family, then he will either be a rababa player or a mizmar player. So it gets pretty specific. If you're going to be if you're a girl, then you're going to be a singer or a dancer. Or seamstress as well. That could be it. But it's education families. You're born into that occupation. And then when we go over to the regional kind of things, it's interesting because supposedly the regional companies are supposed to be for regular people who want to dance and play music. And depending on the region, I see home style people doing it. And then when I really look below the surface, like especially in Luxor, I would say about a third of them have local professional roots. So it gets really complicated on that, on who's doing it. Pardon?
So you've talked about 3 examples of people doing the dance who are already in that subculture or that regional culture. Yeah. How does the dance play out different? How does it look differently, or how does the form change in each of those 3 contexts?
Okay, the women's movement from home style to Gawazi was totally different. The men's style, other than the Gawazi men, sometimes would go ahead and do female movement outside. The male movement stayed pretty similar, but the women's movement was very different. The Gawazi women, of course, they're playing finger cymbals, they're flipping their skirts, they have kind of a swaying movement with a hip flip on each side, whereas the home style women, they didn't do that. They did all sorts of little tiny jumps, and they also did some hip work, but it was different than the Gawazi. So the women's style changed a lot. Then in the regional company, the government, they usually, most of the governments, either are more influenced by Reda or more influenced by Komea. So sometimes the director choreographers of these regional groups go off on their own and try something new. But for the most part, Komea and Reda are the main influences. And then, so now we get into the Cairo influence on everything. But what's interesting is if we take and this is only with the Saidi, this isn't with every region, the Saidi men's style pretty well stays the same through all of these tables. The women's style, totally different, because like the Reda troupe, when they would go in and do research in an area, the men would go dance with men and the women would go dance with women in separate spaces. Now the man made sure that Mahmoud Reda got the movement right. He was taking classes with an Asaya, one of the masters, and they wanted to make sure he got everything right. When he put on the Asaya dance for Loving Karnak, the audience could actually tell which city he had learned in. He was so close to the original. But the women's style was a whole different thing because it's private. So Mahmoud had to take those steps and change them enough so that they weren't exactly right. If he had taken the exact steps and put them on stage, they would have felt betrayed because he had taken something private and made it something public. And, you know, if a Saidi person would have been sitting in the audience and said, you know, we let him into our houses, his women, you know, danced with our women, and he comes and tells everyone in Cairo how my mother dances, how my sister dances, how my wife and daughter dances, you know, haram, he can't do something like that. So he had to change it enough so that it represented what they did, but not exactly what they did. So for us, okay, he wasn't giving us the real steps, but if he had, he would have never stayed on the stage. He would have been abandoned by the Egyptian people. So the movement for women in the Reda troupe is basically Reda repertoire steps, some Cairo, some adapted Saidi steps, Komea, again, it's adapted Saidi steps, but with a lot of Cairo in there. And then once you get to the belly dancers, it's the men around her that are dancing Saidi, and she's doing her own personal artistic vision of whatever fusion she wants to do. It can be Cairo, it can be Saidi, it can be Oriental. You know, she's the star, so she has her own artistic vision of what she's doing. So the men stay pretty consistent with the Saidi, but the women's style changes drastically on each one of the tables.
That is really enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you. So it was fascinating learning all these things, and there were several like, what kind of moments when Mahmoud's talking to me like, well, they did this movement, but of course I couldn't put it on the stage, so I changed it like this. Oh my goodness. So it wasn't even like, oh, he didn't get the movements on stage. It was a conscious decision. They didn't even have the same exact dresses that the Saidi women were wearing, which were kind of like a waist dress with a gathered skirt at the waist, because Cairo people didn't find that attractive, so they wore the Cairo galabeya, or a suit. The suit is, you know, made in the Said as well, so that's always an alternative. But for a while they weren't making them, so they were wearing like a Cairo straight galabeya with something around the hips to represent the Saidi. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Very.
Yeah.
All right. So you've given us this really great framework for understanding what we're looking at, right? Who's doing what for whom, and how is that affecting what's being put on the stage or dance floor or living room. So how do you recommend that we use these tables going forward in our own research and our own dance experience?
Well, for one thing, I'm going to jump over to Journey Through Egypt, but my stated goal for Journey Through Egypt is that people know what they're looking at. And that's what I'm hoping when they finish the course, they can look at something and they know what region it's coming from and they know which table it's coming from. To me, I'm both, historian, dance ethnologist, but I'm also an artist. So my first paid dance jobs didn't have anything to do with Middle Eastern dance. I was a choreographer for musical theater, so it's kind of like, you have carte blanche to be entertaining and to express yourself, and also, modern dance. So to me, it's like you can use all these things as fascinating history and cultural anthropology, and I really pray that people stay interested in that. But I think it's very valid too, is you learn all this, you get inspired by this, and then you bring this information to your art. So if you decide to use it, you can use it, and if you don't decide to use it, you don't have to. So it's like even Mahmoud Reda, he's going there and he's getting inspired by different places, but he didn't, bring the dance exactly to the stage. Like he said, you go somewhere and they had an all-night wedding party. People slowly arrived, and the music happened in patches, and people would dance here and there. And then, right before the sun comes up, and people would start going home. He says, you can never bring that to a stage. You can't bring to a stage how it feels to be with your extended family that only gets to meet at weddings. You don't get to, bring all the good food. You don't get to bring that feeling of hours and hours of sometimes, how things get exciting and then relaxed in waves. He says you can never bring that to the stage. As soon as you bring anything like this to the stage, you automatically alter it. As well as any Egyptian dance for the stage, it doesn't have an entrance and an exit because they're there already, and then they kind of dance and then they kind of stop. So it's not like, so anytime you have an entrance or exit, this is just a side geeky note, then that aesthetic came from somewhere else. So automatically, when you put anything of folklore on the stage, you're already changing it. So just to be conscious of that. And to me, the more I learn, the more excited I get to do more choreography. So as I said, I hope it's exciting for people, and I hope they get really inspired by it. I hope we also, this is my own private agenda, is that there's some people out there that find this fascinating and keep doing research, because a lot of it's dying out. A lot of it's already died out in the last 10 years that I've been doing research. So we need to thank goodness for YouTube so that we can constantly be seeing something new. And thank goodness, when I was going into weddings and dancing, there was no way I would bring out a video camera and videotape my hosts. It's private, so of course I wouldn't do that. But I feel perfectly fine if I go to YouTube and somebody's already posted the wedding. I'm perfectly fine in watching it. And so thank goodness for YouTube as well. But I hope somebody stays interested in this and keeps doing research. One thing that's changing a lot right now is shabi. Shabi used to just mean folklore, just generalized folklore. In fact, the Komeya, the whole name for Komeya is El Firqa El Komeya El Fanan El Shabeya. So it means the national artists of folklore. But now the word shabi is changing a little bit, and it has, so this is something that also can be studied, is like the current events of folklore.
Mm.
So it's complicated. It's deep. It's very contextual. And if anybody has a chance to go to Egypt, I can guarantee you, once you've been to Egypt and you've danced with people, at least that portion of your dance won't be the same. It will be deeper. It will. I can't even if you go and dance to live music there and feel how professional musicians know your dance probably better than you do. Like a good Egyptian drummer, by the time you do a hit, his doom is right there for you. He knows how long it takes you to do a step. And it's just amazing. It's just, I would highly suggest if anybody has a chance, go to Egypt. If you can't dance with the people, at least dance with the live musicians. It changes everything.
That's a happy sigh.
Yeah, that would be great. Come on over.
All
Come on
right.
over.
So we're getting close to the end of the list of questions that I want to ask you.
Okay.
So it just occurs to me to ask you, is there anything that you want to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
No, actually, it's been very comprehensive. I thank you for letting me. I know this is my own personal construct, so I'm not saying that this is the final truth of anything, but I thank you for letting me present it. It's explained a lot, and it's at least something that we can envision and hang on to as we're doing other analysis.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just so excited about any analytical way of thinking about stuff. I was an engineer before I was a dancer, and so I really like to be able to put things into like logical constructs. And not everything is going to fit in every construct, and you have your exceptions, and that's fine. But it gives you like a map to figure out where you want to go. Some things aren't on the map, and that's okay. But it's just so enlightening. So I'm really glad that I could have you talking about this.
Yeah. These categories are mostly the way. It's not necessarily how we would categorize them, but it is how they categorize them. And also, I think it's timely right now because there's not much work for Egyptian dancers in Egypt right now, and so a lot of Egyptian dancers are teaching around the world. And that's helpful when they say, okay, this is a Hagala. So at least now we don't just think like, okay, this is how the Hagala woman dances in the desert. We can find out, like say a man teaches us Hagala dance. We can find out, was his past in Retta? Was his training in Kolmea? Was he one of the nightclub folklore dancers around dancers? Did he learn secondhand from somebody? Sometimes maybe he learned from both. So it's very helpful when you get all these dancers from Egypt, and you can kind of see where they're coming from. And also it's very helpful if you learn some basic Retta and Kolmea fundamental techniques. And so when then you take all these classes from all these dancers, because they mix a lot of folklore and Oriental, it's a big fusion. So if you learn some of the basics of Retta and Kolmea technique, then it will make your learning experience much richer and much faster, and not so frustrating sometimes when you're just trying to figure out, where do my feet go and what does this have to do with Oriental dance? So.
And presumably that can also give you a little bit more information about what is coming from the stage presentation versus the original folklore, too.
Yes. And it also lets you know, okay, is this like a choreography that basically was Retta, or is this somebody's artistic vision? So that's important to know, too. And I would put artistic vision to the last table.
Now, if people take one thing away from this call, what would you want that to be?
Mostly what I would take is one thing that's really helped me all this time is whatever you know, share it out. Because there is so much more for us to learn, and hopefully somebody will get excited and realize that folklore isn't as boring as a lot of people think it is. There's good reason why some of this has lasted 5,000 years. So it's exciting, it's deep, and we can't possibly know everything there is to know about it yet. We need to have people go over there and research, and even if you can't, then just keep looking at YouTube and share it out. And that's the main thing, is don't hold any knowledge in a tight fist. Just share it out. And as soon as you share it out, then other people get excited and they share other stuff with you. And like this clubhouse, I think this is the most wonderful idea, sharing all this knowledge. I think it's great.
Thank you.
So that's my opinion about that.
Excellent. Well, I'm really excited about all of this stuff, and I'm sure other people are. So if people want to learn more from you, how can they do that?
Hopefully they would be excited about, I'm appearing quite a few places. Sometimes it's, I present a couple different subjects. Sometimes I present the whole full journey through Egypt. I have a list on my website. Do you have that up right now?
I do. Before I tell our folks about where you're going to be, can you tell us a little bit more about the program itself and what's involved?
Yes. Sometimes I just do workshops on different subjects in like a festival or something. Other times I present the full Journey Through Egypt. Journey Through Egypt 1 is 20 hours. There's a certificate that says that you've attended all 20 hours and been presented with this information. We go through each region. We go through the 6 tables of each region. I give a small talk on the local, what's important for that local region, whether it's history or, what's important on it. And then we try out the movement. We try on the clothing of the area, both the costume and the home-style clothing, give you more of a feeling, how they tie their headscarves and all sorts of stuff. And then we see a little bit of video on each one of the region. And it's 20 hours, and then that's in studios all over the world. Journey Through Egypt 2 is a continuation of that, another 20 hours. We go into several of the areas that we weren't able to get to the first time, including Nubian, Bedouin, and some other people. And we go deeper. So we go to some new places, and we go deeper in things that we've already looked at, including the tables and seeing video examples of the different tables of the different regions. Then, because I had people say, okay, so what's Journey Through Egypt 3? And I told Rhonda and Roxanne that that could only happen in Cairo. And they said, okay. So anyway, Journey Through Egypt 3 happens in Cairo. It's about a week long, and it's constant information. Then Journey Through Egypt 4, and you can do it one right after another. The last night we have in Journey Through Egypt 3, we take overnight sleeper train into the Said, and we wake up in Luxor. And we take classes with Khairia Mazen and a Saidi stick dancer and all sorts of things, and then continue on to Aswan for Nubian dance. So right now we have Journey Through Egypt 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 2 are in studios worldwide, 3 and 4 are in Egypt. And when things are more stable, then I will also have a 5 and 6. One would be in the Western Desert, including Siwa, and the other one would be in the Sinai, including the Suez Canal. But those are for later. But so we have 1 and 3. 1 through 4.
Mm-hmm. And do people need to do those in order?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so if you're new to this stuff, you should definitely sign up for Journey Through Egypt 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
and it doesn't matter how much time you put in between. Sometimes people, like in Toronto, 1 is going to be one weekend and 2 is the following weekend. Or here in Riverside, we do the same thing. Or if you want to take 1, you can take 2 a year from now. So there's no limitation on that.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to read off a few of the places where you're going to be since you're having a couple of technical problems, so I'll get that information out. So let's see. Sahra is going to be doing Journey Through Egypt 2 in Denver. So if you've done number 1 with her, check her out. And then you have other events coming up in D.C., in Brazil, in Los Angeles, in Germany, in Prague, and then early next year you're going to be in Tulum in Mexico. And then you've got Journey Through Egypt 3 and 4 coming up literally in Egypt. Then the next number 1 is going to be in April in Seattle. And then another one in Austin. I was just there in July. It's a great place. And then in Philadelphia. Then you're doing an in-depth Saidi retreat also in Philadelphia. So that's at the end of April and into early May.
That'll be 1 hour just on Saidi, so.
Nice. And then you're going to be in Toronto for number 1 and 2 in May, and in Cincinnati in November. And I think I also heard that you were going to be back in New Hampshire at Rock On Dance sometime next year.
I am. I'm not sure if we'll have to check the dates, but yes, 1 and 2.
Excellent. So if anybody remembers Amity Elise, who did a business Clubhouse call with us a few months ago, she's going to be hosting. So you can meet 2 Clubhouse guests in one shot.
Yay!
I'd also like to add a plug for your blog. If folks go to journeythroughegypt.com, if you sign up for the newsletter, you're going to get interesting stuff in your inbox, but you also get a really helpful ebook on Zafet El Arusa, which is the bridal procession, and it's so useful. So you definitely want to get on that newsletter.
Yes.
All right. So we have been talking, you and I, but we still have to open this up for everybody else to geek out with us. So we're on a new conference call system this time, and this handles the question and answer process a little bit differently. So we're going to have to figure out how well this works. So in our old system, you could raise your hand, and I could unmute you individually. In this system, if you have a question, you get to unmute yourself, which means that we might have a couple people talking over each other, so we'll just do our best. So I'm going to read out the instructions on how to unmute yourself for different types of call-ins, but don't do that just yet because otherwise you'll start talking before I finish giving out the instructions. So I'll tell you when it's okay to unmute yourself, and we'll go from there. So if you are on the phone, you can press ** to unmute yourself. If you're on Skype, you want to go to the Skype keypad and press **. And if you're on the webcast, if you hover over the little tile for your name, you will probably get a little unmute icon, which looks like a little stand microphone with a slash through it. Now, I'm pretty sure that will work for the webcast folks. I tried to test it pretty carefully. But if for some reason you can't unmute yourself, webcast people, there's also a chat box on the right-hand side. If you click on the little icon that looks like a speech bubble from a cartoon, you can type in, unmute me, and ideally with your phone number so I know who you are, or the first couple digits of your phone number, and I'll be happy to do that. Okay, so those are the instructions. When you're ready to ask a question, you can unmute yourself, and just start by saying your name so we know who we're talking to. Go for it. All right, I'm not seeing anybody yet.
Uh-oh.
Hi there. Who are we speaking to? Oh, that might have been Sahra. Okay, let me check the chat box. Okay, again, if you would like to ask a question, you can press ** on your phone, ** on your Skype keypad, or you can unmute yourself with the little microphone icon on the webcast, or you can request to be unmuted by typing into the chat box, or if you want to type instead of talking, you can actually type in your question in the chat box. I'm really surprised we don't have any questions, but maybe that's because we had such a good conversation. Okay, it looks like we've got a caller in the New York area.
Oh, wow.
Hi, this is Miss Reen.
Hi there.
Hi. I really enjoyed this call. It was super interesting. And I wonder if you have any advice on getting started, like getting off the ground in research. I have a doctorate, but in a different field, and so I'm kind of, like I have a sense of the model that I'm used to working with, but it's not in dance ethnography. So I'm wondering where you would recommend starting.
Do you enjoy doing field work, or do you enjoy doing researching in,
Well, I'm in English, so there's not really. So I don't have any experience with field work. I'm mostly a library research. That's my background.
Okay. There's a lot of very good books about, to get you started. One of the problems we do have with this is sources. Some sources, there's very uneven sources out there. So that's one of the things we have to look at as a librarian researcher. I'm sure you realize that. But there are some really good books. I'm putting together a book list, and it should come out pretty soon. I'm putting together now, and it should be listed on the newsletter pretty soon, that talks about different books to get started. What kind of interest are you interested in Cairo, or just generally, or regional?
Well, my interests in English are somewhat related to my interests in dance. I guess I'm interested in where the line is drawn between insider groups and outsider groups. Mostly I've looked at that in terms of ethnic American writers. And I'm also interested in versions of things, like an early story, and where does it go, like different varieties of, like, for example, like fairy tales, like how that looks different in different regions, and how people will pick up an old story and adapt it for a new purpose, and how far you can stretch it, like what are the key things that give it an identity, like when is it the same story, and when does it stop being the same story, when does it become something different.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
You could do that with dance. You could do that with dance so well if you just take what jumps in my mind right now is the Hagala. Like the Hagala, you're in New York, right?
Mhm.
You're so lucky, because the only Hagala film that I know of is in the New York Public Library. And it's in the media section, and it's under the name Egypt Dances by Magda Salah. But that's the only one that we know of. And the only woman I know that actually took a lesson from Hagala woman was Farida Fahmy. And soon after that, they made the film Love and Karnak. So some of that appears in there. So it would be interesting for you to start that, and then to go through the different tables. And also there's quite a few cultural anthropologists that used to be traveling around with the Western Desert Bedouins. They also have accounts of Hagala women coming in at the wedding times. That would be fascinating to find those. And then you could follow it through, how does the Reda present it? How does Kolmeya present it? How is it presented by, like, Azza Sharif or Nagwa Fouad? And then the different dancers who are traveling around the world, they're teaching Hagala as well. What have they done with it? I know the Egyptians have changed the step from like a down three-quarter shimmy. Some of them are now teaching it out because they think it's prettier. There's all sorts of things. If you take something focused enough, it would be really interesting to see how it changes.
I'm so excited about this. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm excited that you're
about
excited.
This. If you do it, you have to share it with us.
Yes, I know. I want to hear about it when you do it.
You bet.
Good.
That was a great question. Thank you.
That
I'm going to go ahead and mute you again, and I think we have another caller who just unmuted. You're showing up as in Fresno, but that might mean that you're on Skype. Did you have a question? Yep, I think I just heard you.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, what's your name?
Oh, this is Nadia from Chicago.
Nadia, nice to hear from you. What's your question?
Actually, I didn't have a question. I was trying to put up on the chat that someone needs to put that video up that you were talking about in the library in New York. Put it on YouTube.
Unfortunately, she doesn't want to do it.
Why?
I know. Well, Morocco's tried. I've tried.
Oh, it's Morocco. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but she was a ballerina in Egypt, and she did this video for a doctoral research thing. I'm not sure about the particulars on that, but she also has a doctoral dissertation on it that I'm in the process of getting, and that's going to be fun to read. But she gave it to the New York Public Library, and she doesn't want to make copies of it. She says that part of her life is finished.
We could.
I know. I wish.
You know how you can do the pixelated face? That's really too bad. That's really too bad. Because I don't think I'll ever have a chance to see that.
Yeah, I've gone to New York twice just to see it, and it was well worth it both times. I was really scared the first time because they had it on, like, I don't know, that really thick old videotape, and I was afraid to stop and start the tape because I thought it was going to break. And then they said they had another copy, and then now they have it in DVD, but it's held inside, and you can watch it, but you don't have access to it. You just can watch it.
Okay, well, that's too bad. Well, thank you. I want to say thank you, too, so much for doing this. Everyone's enjoyed it, and it's been very educational, and you don't really get access to you so easily all the time, so thank you.
Thank you. It's all my honor. I love this.
I guess it's probably too much to hope that it's available through interlibrary loan, but if they've got the only copy, they're probably not too...
You know, it's worth a try, because I know she personally doesn't, she says that part of her life is finished and it's done. But maybe the library, between libraries, might do something. I don't know. That's
I was a library page in high school, and we did an awful lot of that.
Really?
But yes.
You know? May I suggest that? It might be interesting to see if things like that are, can be done, because in the old days, of course, it was this huge video thing that would get shipped around, but now it must have some sort of, I don't know, it's a possibility. It would be so exciting if other libraries could have access to this. Therefore, all these other dancers.
The worst that can happen is they say no, and you have to make a phone call to New York.
Yeah. And really, this one film, Egypt Dances, I went to New York for 3 days, and I was going to spend all 3 days in the media library there watching things. I had a whole list. All 3 days, I just spent on that one thing, Egypt Dances, because they go through all different regions, and it was fascinating. It would be definitely worth the trip in. So. That would be great.
There are all kinds of great dance opportunities in New York, so you could combine it with a workshop trip or private lessons or anything you wanted.
For sure.
All right. Okay. Well, do we have any other questions for Sahra? This is a great opportunity to pick her brain, so you can press ** to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. I hear a dog. Is that yours, Sahra, or do we have another caller?
That's my dog. She's outside, but she's still having way too much fun out there. She's chasing a squirrel that's on top of the house.
Oh, really fun stuff then.
Yeah, squirrel's safe, but she's making a loud noise.
We used to have squirrels in our attic, and my dad would trap them in one of the humane traps and then let them out in the park. And he'd give them a head start, and then let the dog chase them, and she never caught him, but she had a really good time.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
Sitting at the bottom of a tree barking.
Pretty much. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions, so I think we are going to call it a night. I do have a few more things to say, though, and the first of them is thank you so much, Sahra. This has been so enlightening and so much geeky fun.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. To be honest, I was a little bit nervous because it's the first time I've ever done anything like this, and I'm going, I hope I don't sound stupid or boring. But it was just so much fun. So much fun. Thank you.
My pleasure. And I'd also like to give another thanks to our sponsor, Leotoes. So if you're interested in some padded dance footies, you should check them out at leotoes.com. And thank you, everybody, for coming. This is the end of our call, but that doesn't mean the conversation has to end. We've got a private Facebook group just for Clubhouse listeners, and I'll send out an email to the Clubhouse list shortly, which will include a link there. I'll also include a link to our call recording, so if you want to pick out anything that you missed the first time around, you can listen to that again, as well as a link to the Journey Through Egypt site so that you can find out how you can learn from Sahra. And I'm also going to include a link to our feedback survey. So I run the Clubhouse, but this is for all of us. So I'd really like to hear what topics and speakers you'd like to hear in another episode, and also if there are any improvements that I can make to make this call work better for you. Our next call is going to be on Thursday, October 30th at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and Julie Eason from the Belly Dance Business Academy is going to be returning for her second guest spot, and she's going to talk about crowdfunding for the performing arts. So if you've ever thought about doing a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe campaign to help you run a big show or a DVD project or any other kind of thing that needs funding, you're going to learn an awful lot from her. And the last thing that I want to say is that this is the come-on-in kind of clubhouse, not the no boys allowed kind. So if you know somebody who would like to join us, you can invite them to do so at bellydancegeek.com/clubhouse. And until next time, happy dancing. Thank you again, Sahra, and good night, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. For more geek-tacular resources, visit bellydancegeek.com.